So I can't believe it. We're towards the end of our program. Just one paper left, which is we're going to hear from the friends now of Greyfriars Kirkyard. We're going to hear about the good, the bad, and the objective, the ethics in sharing history. And we're going to hear from Daria and from Lesley. So if I now can pass over to you and ask you to share your screen, that would be tremendous.
Thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'm Daria Tuhtar. I'm the membership secretary for the Friends of Greyfriars Kirkyard. As Susan said, I'm kind of tag teaming this presentation with Lesley, so I feel like I have added pressure to keep to time going first. So let me just share our joint presentation. Is that full screen, Susan?
It is, we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So, like I said, this will be a joint effort by Lesley and myself. I'll be giving a quick introduction to the Friends of Greyfriars Kirkyard, and following that, I'll be giving a bit of a talk about how we went about creating our inaugural book, The Dead Center of Edinburgh Stories about Greyfriars Kirkyard, because who doesn't love a good pun? So, May is a big anniversary for the Friends for a number of reasons. You can see we were constituted in May 2021 as part of what I suppose was a bit of a precursor to the Legacies in Stone project, the Making Lasting Impressions project, which, I mean, Susan can speak to it in a lot more detail, given that she was the lead on that, but it was centered around community learning and interpretation in Greyfriars Kirkyard, and what better way to facilitate that than by setting up a friends group. And our kind of first challenge that we set ourselves was to publish this guidebook. I call it a guidebook kind of for shorthand. It's not a guidebook as such, in that it doesn't give you a prescribed route to take through the Kirkyard. It's not kind of geographically organized, it's more thematically organized. But you could, there are enough entries in it that pretty much wherever you're standing in the Kirkyard, you could open the book and find an entry relating to something nearby. So you could kind of craft your own route using the book. And quite significantly, we became an SCIO, so a Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organization, as of this May 7th. And that was just seen as an important step for us to become a bit more of a legitimate organization and also take some of the liability off of individual members and kind of transfer it to the organization, which would hopefully allow us to take on more ambitious and, yeah, expensive, risky, what have you projects in the future. So much like the other friends groups on this call, I think we probably engage in a lot of the same activities. A lot of our work involves giving tours to the public. So that's me on the left there giving a tour jointly with the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which is my day job. We do a lot of collaboration with different stakeholders. So that's Chris in the middle. And I'm sure you will have seen kind of coverage of the recent event we did in Greyfriars centered on the John Bain monument and looking to see if there is a hidden burial vault there, perhaps, and trying to kind of uncover some of its other secrets. So the Friends were quite involved in delivering that day and promoting it. And we also work closely alongside the City of Edinburgh Council to keep the Kirkyard looking as good as it can. And one of the, I think, functions of the Friends is to kind of flag things that need repairing or maintenance, but also just to kind of lead on smaller projects of our own, again, with the council's kind of oversight there. So that's some of the Friends helping to lead one of the burial lairs in Covenanters. So back to the book, Dead Center of Edinburgh, Stories about Greyfriars Kirkyard. There are 48, I call them chapters, but if you were to pick up the book, you would see that they're kind of one-page entries coupled with a relevant image, and they were authored by about 10 people, so the entries aren't individually kind of attributed. There is a list of contributors at the front of the book. Of course, there were some kind of silent contributors as well that didn't necessarily want to be named, but I would say, give or take, there were about kind of 10 core contributors. So you can see that in terms of how the 48 chapters were delegated, most people did more than one chapter. And you can see from the image on the left that the cover is an excerpt from the very impressive phallus mural monument. The book currently retails for £14, and it's sold both independently by ourselves, so through our website, or just if we're giving a tour, we'll usually have some books on hand to sell to anyone that wants one. They're also available at the Kirk and the National Library. I might be missing one or two locations, but it's always kind of a working task for us to try to get it into more retail locations across Edinburgh and beyond. So you can see it took us just under 2 years to deliver the guidebook. So we were constituted in May, and in July is when we really kind of got down to business and started to craft the book. Um, the autumn and winter saw us kind of delegating the chapters, and we very much wanted to be led by both, the kind of obvious stories, but also what people themselves were interested in researching and writing about. We didn't want to just kind of give people homework, essentially, oh, you go off and write about this. We very much wanted people to kind of play to their strengths and research things that they were already interested about. And then we submitted that first draft in March 2022. We did have an editor, Elspeth Wills, who is a professional editor, so that certainly helped in giving the book kind of a cohesive voice, making sure that we were kind of keeping to the recommended length, because obviously the longer the book, the more expensive it would be to produce. So we had to be quite strict with ourselves in terms of length. And also she did, a great job fact checking and things like that. Over the summer and autumn 2022, it started to take kind of visual shape. One of the great things we were able to do was we got one of our members' daughters to illustrate kind of a visual glossary of some of the most common images you'll see across Greyfriars in terms of the kind of symbolism on the monuments. So that was really exciting for her. And then we also, took kind of open source images as well. And the book was finally completed in winter 2023, and we launched it in April 2023 at the Kirk. So that was a great kind of chance for us to celebrate this, what to us felt like quite a monumental achievement, because, we were all pretty new to this. I don't, aside from a few exceptions, none of us had ever published a book before. So I think, which can sometimes help, because I think, enthusiasm ultimately can outweigh any kind of reservations you might have about the process. But that was definitely, yeah, it was a great milestone for us. It was an event that was open to the public. We paired it with different tours around the Kirkyard, sold quite a lot of copies. And we're now on our second print run, which I think is probably running out soon, actually. So we'll probably need to look to do a third. So tips, if you would like to try your hand at writing a book. These are just some things that I think we learned from the process that might be relevant to your circumstances as well. Obviously, funding is very important. So our book funding came from a number of different sources. There was some kind of startup funding already for the Friends that came from the National Lottery Heritage Fund as, again, part of the Making Lasting Impressions project. I think we got additional funding from Edinburgh World Heritage. We also got some from the council, because there's a company that will retrieve metals and other materials from cremations, and then some of the proceeds of that go back to the council for kind of charitable allocation. So we managed to benefit from some of that. So in all, the first run cost just under 4,000 because we had to factor in the design. And then every other kind of print run we've done has been obviously less expensive because we've only had maybe minor kind of changes to make. So that's kind of the upfront cost. But then with time, obviously our profits increase. Like I said, delegate and play to your strengths. Obviously, I don't sound like I'm from Scotland, so I didn't feel comfortable, for example, writing about the nuances of the Covenanters or other elements of Scottish history, but I'm very interested in kind of medical history, and I ended up writing about kind of historic pandemics and disease outbreaks and how that influenced burial practices in Greyfriars, and that very much felt like more of my comfort zone, and I think we tried to kind of honor people's preferences across the board. Already spoke about the importance of having a very good editor or project manager to keep everyone to time, to chase, to, again, provide that kind of consistency and coherency across the inputs. So yeah, we're very indebted to Elspeth for her for contributions. Um, it was a great opportunity to, I guess, expand our research methodology, in the sense that, we weren't just doing kind of cursory Google searches of these different entries. We were exploring the National Archives, going to the National Library, trying to find primary sources, and I think these are all things that will definitely come in handy if we look to kind of publish anything else in the future, now that we kind of know where to look for this information. Consider ongoing promotion and legacy. So this is usually the first touch point people have when it comes to learning about the Friends, and it's a great kind of way, it's a great hook. So if we're giving people a tour, if we manage to sell them one of the books, then it obviously leads them to our website or to find out more about us. So it's kind of a good way of piquing people's interest. Although obviously I will say being in Greyfriars, that is already a very popular destination for people. So in some ways the work is kind of already done for us, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have this kind of additional offering. And lastly, don't be afraid to reimagine old stories. This is what Leslie's about to talk about now. So, we did kind of discuss, should we have Bobby in there? Should we have Bloody Mackenzie? When people might already be familiar with these stories, but we thought, yes, they are part of the overall kind of Greyfriars narrative, and maybe we can provide a new spin on them or dispel some maybe inaccuracies or misperceptions about them, and particularly their kind of complicated ethical moral legacies in some cases, which again is hopefully a good segue into what Leslie's about to talk about. So, Leslie, over to you, but I'll still be sharing my screen and she can just tell me when to change slides.
Super, thank you. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about is really a quick, I guess, whistle-stop tour of the kind of key elements of Greyfriars. Um, so as you can imagine, the monuments, although the site's obviously a lot older, a lot of our primary monuments are 17th and 18th century. So as you can imagine, we're dealing with a very problematic time period in general, because this, while on the one hand is the time of Enlightenment, so it's the birth of modern science and all these different sort of advancements, it's also Britain's key period in colonialization and enslavement. So a lot of our inhabitants, particularly being merchants, are quite heavily linked to that. So you do have this element where most of the famous people will have a link to enslavement, most likely. Um, Another issue we tend to have, and well, yeah, obviously you can see in the previous talk, there is a lovely element to local folklore and ghost stories. There can be issues sometimes, as Daria's touched on, that stories can become slightly romanticized, vilified, and new elements are added that almost sort of lead to issues then with the real history of the person. And actually, weirdly enough, Bobby's probably a great example. Um, the story of Bobby is obviously lovely, but then we have the myth that's come up with touching his nose and the damage it's done to the statue. That's a heavy area for debate, so we'll stay away from that. Um, Obviously, another one which I'll talk about in a second with a particular issue, blessing, curse, whatever you want to call it, with Greyfriars is the Harry Potter connection. Some of the other things we deal with, which has been talked about today as well, particularly in Dunblane there, women are very much a footnote in this time period and even in later periods as well. Most women are the wife of, the mother of, and you don't know a lot about their histories. So what we kind of want to then look at then is how do we actually present that to the public in a more kind of ethical manner? If we go to the next slide, please, Sarah.
Oh,
Next.
sorry, there you go.
Okay. So when we are doing tours, there's a couple of ways you can sort of approach this. If you're going to talk about the people, it's about being objective. You're not there to sort of offload your personal opinion on it. It's up to your tour attendees to make that decision themselves. But the idea is you're not hiding the history from them. You're not sugarcoating the history. You're just giving the facts as you know them. Because as you can imagine, even from the last talk as well, the Covenanters is a very heated topic. So it's, you're there to present the facts that we know without maybe sort of engaging in any kind of potential arguments with people there that may have a different opinion from you on what side was good and what side was bad. Another approach, which actually is maybe kind of more common in some of our tours, is you focus on the place, not the people. And some people have done a great job of that today, actually. You're talking about what the kirkyard is, not the place. So it's like the symbolism, the architecture, the history of the place. What was it before it was a kirkyard? Was it something else before a kirkyard? When did the particular styles of stones appear? Why was the roof taken off the kirk? That those types of things do sort of still engage in the local history without straying into those more difficult topics if you want to avoid them. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of quick examples. Hopefully I can do this in record time. As Daria mentioned, we've obviously got George Bloody Mackenzie, as he's known in Greyfriars, and he's an excellent example of this kind of ethical balancing act when you want to talk about someone, because on the one hand, as you can imagine, the bloody Mackenzie bit might imply that he's not a bit of a tainted history in terms of his approach to advocating for the torture of Covenanters, the imprisonment, the torture, the execution. But there's the other side as well, where it was actually he was largely responsible for the end to the witch panics and the witch trials because he brought in the concept of needing stronger evidence and not torturing accused women to get them to admit to being witches. So you got those two very different sides of him there, and the idea is you're not sort of justifying what he did to the Covenanters by saying, "Oh, but he helped stop the trials." You're just giving those two histories at the same time to show that, no person is black and white. It's, there's a real spectrum of a person's life and personality.
2 minutes now.
Next slide. Sorry, did you want the next slide,
Yeah,
Lesley?
yeah, but this is the last slide in, so that's fine. The next one is obviously Captain Thomas Riddle, who, just in case anyone was not sure, he's not actually Lord Voldemort. He was a captain in the East India Company. So again, there is another sort of idea where you've got someone who will have links to enslavement, might not have been directly involved, but he was married to the daughter of a Jamaican plantation owner, so it's likely he did have that connection. And obviously, the East India Company's also got a very problematic history as well. But him as the person, what we know, he was a captain of two different India men in his career. As we said, married to the sort of daughter of the Jamaican plantation, sorry. But the important thing is you're presenting that in a manner that you're given the facts without allowing him to become vilified. Because what you have is the issue here, particularly with Thomas Riddle. You can't see it in the photo, but because so many people visit that grave because of the connection to Harry Potter, the ground is completely destroyed. The grass is gone. It's down to the bare sort of whatever the turf was placed on in the first place. So there is damage being done. So while it's good that it's bringing people into the kirkyard, it's got the counter that people are damaging it by kind of going up, touching it, walking around a bit in front. So it's trying to sort of put this in an area, but there's this history. This is a person's place of, eternal rest, and it's about balancing the interest, the history, and the respect for what it is. Yeah, I think that's everything. Final shameless plug that we have a couple of tours, 7th and 8th of June for National Cemeteries Week. You can find them on Eventbrite if you want to visit. But yeah, otherwise, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you both for such a brilliant introduction to Greyfriars Kirkyard. For anybody who didn't know about the site, I'm sure that there wasn't too many people who had never heard of Greyfriars, but the guidebook as well, it is an amazing shop front for all of the different stories that you can find around the graveyard. And Lesley for problematizing some of that storytelling. To that end, there was a couple of comments in the chat which was looking towards the stories of women in the graveyard, and the idea that while pre 1970s that women's history could be somewhat overlooked, that today really women's history is a key theme within local history, and that perhaps sometimes a more representative understanding of women's history might be overlooked because there has been a focus on really famous women. I wonder if you could respond to that in any way, Lesley.
Yeah, I think it's one of the problems, like myself doing my own, I'm a kind of accounting historian by day, if you like. So one of the issues you do come up against is this thing called survivorship bias, where the records that survive are the people that were deemed significant at that time. And what you find is that is a lot of white men. You know, to be perfectly blunt, that is what tends to survive. Greyfriars, there's a bit of an exception. There are a couple examples where there are monuments that are quite, the woman is the centre of the monument. Elizabeth Patton's a lovely example where the whole monument is for her, but there's still that element where she's still a wife and a mother. But going to that kind of point about, the everyday women, non-upper class women do tend to get lost along with a lot of normal working class people. Because, for example, there are thousands of people in Greyfriars that were everyday people in Edinburgh that we may never know anything about them because the records are just gone, or they're just sitting in an archive somewhere waiting for someone to discover who they are. But yeah, I think sometimes you can. It takes a lot, as other people have adhered to. You need to really, and even Darius, and you really need to dig into the archives to find people. And actually, what's kind of interesting is accounting records tend to be all that survive sometimes for a lot of indicators for these sort of lesser known people. Not quite the same, but the witch trials, we find a lot of victims in the accounting records because they know the cost to execute them. That's where we find their names. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to do because sometimes the records just don't exist anymore, so it can be hard to find more about them. But there are a lot of people now, as you say, there's a lot stronger interest now to uncover these women's histories and put them into the record where they belong.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lesley. And I should just say, at the recent event that Daria mentioned to do with the John Bain Mausoleum, there was a talk given by Chris Cooper, who is a long-time champion of that monument and its conservation. And part of his talk was really strongly focusing on the very active role that John Bain's wife, Euphane, took in overseeing the creation of the monument and managing that as a building project for her husband to commemorate him. Which brings us to the end of today's proceedings. If I can ask all of the speakers to put their cameras on so that we can all see you again. Well, honestly, I can't tell you how rewarding and interesting and stimulating I have found today. It has been tremendous. And I think it has just shown the absolute scale of work which is being undertaken by community groups across Scotland in terms of actively being stewards for their local heritage sites. So I'd like to give it a very long round of applause for all of our speakers today. That was absolutely tremendous. I enjoyed all of the presentations. I also want to thank all of the participants who have come along. I've been reading through the chat list, which is just full of good comments, full of praise for all the speakers. You have absolutely inspired those who have come along. I really need to thank my colleague, Barbara, for her technical wizardry of getting the proceedings along today. And I also need to kind of re-thank our funders. So that's the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Historic Environment Scotland and Algeo. And I must give the last word of the day to Jim Mackay.
Well, it's very kind of you. I have to say, well, just to reiterate that I hope you're all now fired up with enthusiasm to get more closely engaged with your own community graveyards. And I'm sure our speakers today have given you lots of ideas to put into action yourselves. And what struck me actually was the diversity of the Scottish graveyards we've seen today and the diversity of issues associated with them. But what does unite them all is the passion they arouse in friends and communities. So just to reiterate, many thanks to Edinburgh World Heritage for hosting this conference, this very successful conference, and to Susan personally for so capably chairing and organising the session. And of course, to all our wonderful inspirational speakers and to all of you, our attendees. So long live all friends of graveyards.